We've had a good lunch? Yes, I can't hear anything. Are we all ready to start? Yes. Whoa, I get a bit of a cheer up there. Okay. So welcome, this is the training track. This is the panel discussion called Beyond Throwing a Dog a Bone. It's all about kennel enrichment. So if you don't think that's what you want to hear, you better go now. But I shouldn't leave because we've got 4 fantastic speakers. Okay, we all settle down. Now, I don't know what you in the States, but in the UK we call this a graveyard slot because you've all had a good lunch, you all want to have a little sleep. So let's get a bit of energy into the room. But we're going to start with a fantastic speaker, Bonnie Bergin, many of you will know. And it's going to be followed by a colleague of hers, Shinya Kawasaki, and they're going to speak for about 10 minutes each on kennel enrichment, and then we'll move on to the other speakers. So, settle down. Bonnie, you're welcome. Bonnie.
Okay, so I am spending some time on trying to introduce a new idea or a new way of looking at getting your dogs to feel more comfortable when they go out in public. So I'm going to start with, and I have 2 things I have to work with. Which is this one? Which is this button? Sorry.
Just one of the arrows, that one.
Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at what really is a big part of your dog or your puppy's life, and that is their 6 senses: the smell, taste, equilibrium, sight, touch, and sound. All right. So here's what I found out, that you look at the brain and you think of the brain as being this object.
You've got to move that one as well. There you are, you're good.
You think of the brain as being this object. Basically, the brain is working in this silent, dark space. It doesn't know anything about what's happening in the world. It doesn't know that you reached out. It doesn't know that you touch something. It doesn't know anything about that, because all it gets is these lights and vibrations and chemicals into the brain. But it translates those into senses, and those are the things that we want to get our dogs and puppies really attuned to, is all these different senses in the world that they will or have experienced. So it used to be thought that the brain was quiet until it got something kicked it into play, just like our muscles, which lie dormant until they're stimulated. Now they found out that the brain is talking to the neurons in the brain over and over and over every day, every moment of every day. And in that process, when they're firing, they are actually looking at you and your life and making predictions. So what you think just happened a split second ago, either where you moved your hand there or you heard a sound out of my voice, that you predicted that was going to happen. Now this is
Give it to me, I'll do it for you if you like.
This is a really strange concept, but I guess in neuroscience it's been going on for about 10, 15 years. They've looked at it from this perspective. So these unconscious neuro pathways are trying to anticipate what's going to happen next. And when in that anticipation process, they're trying to figure out what action you should take. Or in our case, we're looking at puppies and dogs should take. It's their best guesses, and they have to figure out how to keep the body alive. So they initiate these movements. You thought you had free will. You thought your dogs had free will, your puppies had free will. It's not true. It's the brain already making these things happen before the body even moves. Now, don't ask me questions about this, because I'm just telling you what the science says. I'm not a neuroscientist myself. So here's the brain trying to take clues from the environment and trying to figure out what to do next. And they look at a combination of these past experiences that are closest to what just happened, and then they have the body make those movements. and we're talking about dogs as well. So it used to be that we all thought the brain was reactive, or that we were making a decision when we saw a snake to jump out of the way. Brain already did it. Already had you jump out of the way. It's already pre-prepared for that. And if you were waiting for that motor movement, if you made the motor movement, you'd be dead. You didn't move fast enough. That's why the brain does these things. So we've all seen dogs that notice something that startled them. And I want you to think for a second about your own experiences. You went somewhere that you've gone on a regular basis, but there was something different in that environment. Somebody set a box there, or something that was not there the day before that. You notice it. You notice it immediately, because again, your brain predicted that it would be the way it was the day before, and it's not. There's a box there. And so the brain is startled, as we've seen our dogs be startled. And when the brain is startled, it takes that information and it puts it through all the neural pathways, and it says, okay, this is a new way to look at this. It's all about prior experience. The brain takes prior experience and makes assumptions about what's going to happen next. And then when it happens, if it's not what the brain predicted, there is a startle effect. Did you all see that one? Okay, so startle is again a wrong prediction, and a wrong prediction just changes the course of action that animal, dog or human, will take. Because what it's doing is saying, that's not what I predicted. So again, you've got to be thinking about prediction. Your brain is predicting all the time. There's two kinds of memories. Well, there's a lot more, but I'm going to focus on two kinds. There's episodic and there's semantic. Episodic memories are personal experiences. Semantic are learned information. And children are really focused on episodic. Older people rely more on semantic. So let's look at our puppies and our dogs. They are definitely focused on episodic. And so if we want them to go out into the world and we want them to work with someone who's disabled, our job is to make sure that they have had multiple opportunities to experience things so that their brain will predict things. And even if their brain made a mistake and that dog gets startled while it's side by side with its new partner, it will have the opportunity to quickly regain its equilibrium because it's had so many experiences that you, the puppy raisers and the dog trainers, provided those dogs. How do you make sure that the experiences they had were positive? Because obviously, if they're not positive, then when they're startled, what they're going to do is recreate old negative experiences. So you have interoceptive systems, which is basically the whole inside of your body, your hormones, your tissues, your blood, your immune system. And if that's not feeling very good, your body budget is out of balance. And they've done some really interesting studies about this. The one I think that's the most common is there was a bunch of judges that had to work with prisoners and decide whether or not they could get out. And before lunch, when these people were hungry, they wouldn't let them out. After lunch, they let a whole bunch of them out because their body budget was out of balance before lunch. They were hungry. But when your body budget is out of balance, you don't go, oh my God, I'm hungry. You go, that person did something wrong. You blame it on some other situation. So one of the things that we just really have to do when we're taking our dogs out and our puppies out is to make sure our body budget is in balance and their body budget is in balance. Because if they're not in balance, if you look at the left side of this chart, whether they're low aroused or mid aroused or high aroused, they'll find fault with that environment, that situation, or that person. If, in fact, their body budget is in balance, then they look at it and they interpret it as a positive situation. Our job is to make sure that when we have these dogs and puppies we're working with experiencing something, that they see it as a positive situation, so that when later on they're predicting, that they'll predict it as a positive experience. We look at this, interestingly, a study was done that analytical or introverted dogs, coupled with some neuroticism, will definitely anticipate situations to be unpleasant. And then our more extroverted dogs or expressive dogs that have less neuroticism will mostly interpret things to be pleasant. So now you know where some of this stuff is coming from that you've experienced with your dogs. New experiences are best done, and we've done some research on it, and I absolutely know it to be true. New experiences you're providing your dogs or your puppies, particularly, of course, your puppies, have to be done in the home or a very perceived safe environment. If you do that, almost every experience that your puppy or dog will have will come out of that situation feeling that that's a positive thing to happen in their lives. Now that's in their brain, now that will be perceived later on and predicted later on to be positive. Sometimes you have them in the home, but you also have the mom or a surrogate with that dog, with a puppy in that situation to help make it more positive. But here's the thing that we just found out about that I think is really important. You have to also, you the trainer who's helping this puppy or dog experience this situation, you have to show happiness or acceptance. So now you have a safe home, you have a surrogate or the mom there, and you have your own emotional positive. So anytime you're working with these dogs, you got to make sure your body budget's in balance. After lunch, after a nap, when you take these puppies out, they should be fed a treat or two before you take them into the mall for the first time. All of those things need to be looked at. So you can, for example, maybe there's an item you want your dog to be exposed to. You can walk up to it, you can walk by it, you can smell it, you can eat it, you can touch it, you can taste it, but you never require your dog to approach it. Never require your dog to approach it. Let them figure it out. Let them do it at their own pace. Do not force them. Do not encourage them, but also don't lure them to it. Just let them be in that environment and let them, after a point of time, choose to make that approach. Now, this has been another interesting research that we found out about. Robots can help. So here's this dog that you just saw, went up and interacted with that crawling baby. Oh my gosh. This one is, for whatever reason, the one on the right side, my right side, this dog was exposed to that robot, and this baby that lives with him in his home, this is the first day that baby crawled. And the dog was just complacent about it, did not have any reaction to it. Although, for some reason, that video didn't turn out well. Here's another situation. They've been useful in dog training, and so what we have now is a robotic puppy. I'm sure some of you have seen this. The dog was curious about the robotic puppy, went up to it, sniffed it like they would sniff another dog, actually play bowed. So they're looking at this robot as though it's a real live dog. And then in the next video, you'll see that the dog just walked up to the trainer and didn't even pay any attention to the robot. But I left this robot on there for an extensive period of time because it's so fascinating what this little robot can do. One of the reasons that I'm pointing out the robot is because it's a little yippy dog, or emulates a little yippy dog. And most of the time when you go to a mall, somebody's going to have a little yippy dog there, and your dog's going to react to it. Well, this situation where you expose your dog to this little yippy dog, look at it roll over. And one would think that the dog would be really concerned about it, but the dog's getting used to it. But look at this. This is what blew me away.
Only got 10 minutes, it's very close.
Time was up? There. And the dog just looked at it, went over, smelled it, and walked away. The second one shows the dog just walking past it. I hope you saw that. So another thing is we had this doll that we had in what was an environment that the dog was out in a lot of times. So we just let the dog make the choice to go up and smell the little doll standing there, still not moving. And then we had in the second video where the doll actually moved. The trainer actually had the dog move. And then this third one is a strange environment, but there's a surrogate mom there, and the dog actually goes up and smells it. So here are your 6 senses. And I'm going to skip past a lot of this. So I would suggest you use stainless steel dredges because you can put odor in them, and they don't carry an odor themselves. Here's tying it to, I would tie sacks of dog hair to that small robotic dog. I would stuff a plush dog with dog hair, but go get dog hair from grooming parlors that are of a breed that you're not using in your program. Use cloth diapers, use unwashed kids' clothes. Have your mom, because of taste, have the mother eat different foods so that the puppies are getting different tastes. And then, of course, equilibrium, walking over different things. And I love that. Still items, move to moving items, touch, items of differing textures, sounds. I'd leave the television on. Wherever they are, I'd have a television or some sounds on. And now Shinya is going to make his presentation.
Okay, my name is Shinya Kawasaki. I'm not on the. Okay, thank you. I'm not on the schedule, but I'm from PAALS for Purple Hearts, and I'm father of the baby you saw on the slides. I'm going over the list of the items that we are using for our puppies. I was going to hand out 2 sheets, which one is with the list of the items, and the other one is check sheet to keep record of how our puppy responded to items. And now Bonnie is handing out the papers. Thank you, Bonnie. So we got most of the items from local thrift store and Amazon.com. I put link to the items on the sheet. So on the right side, there is a link for the items. So I can give you a digital version of this sheet if you want, if you like the ideas, and you can click that, and then you can get items. So this list is significantly reflected by our experience with service dog training, and we categorize the items into 6 groups based on which sense of dog will be mainly affected by items. And this categorization process is based on our perspectives, so dog wouldn't disagree with us. Dog wouldn't agree with us. Now, smell in this group, as Bonnie said, we have farm animals and dogs in this group, so we are going to get hair of animals and dogs from local farmer, zoo, or grooming business, and then we put it in dredge and then place it where dog can smell, and then it will become normal to dogs. And the next group is taste. We didn't come up any specific items in this group. Okay. And then equilibrium. My English is not perfect, so please be patient with me, and I cannot pronounce well this word. But this group, we don't need our dog to be able to stand like this in the picture, but we need dog to be able to handle the situation. They need to stabilize themselves or the vibrations when they will feel or experience when they are in a car or elevators. Okay, for this group, we have car and wagon. We put puppies in wagon or car with our instructor and then give similar experience to puppies, which they will experience in the future. And then we put balanced disc in puppy pen so dogs will experience the situation they need to stabilize themselves. And side, we came up a lot of items in this group, so we divided items into 3 groups. 1 item that doesn't move, but dog would react to, and 2, dog would react to the item when it's only moving. And then the 3rd category is the items that dog would react when it's moving and it's not moving. So still items, we have stuffed animals and statues. And items for moving, inflatable tube guy, balloon, bubble, kite, ribbon wand, flag, fog machine, projector. We're gonna project TV program on the wall for the puppies. And items that doesn't move and also move, but dog would react both times. We got bike, skateboard, crawl, baby ball, pinwheel, remote control car, umbrella, disco ball reflection, Roomba, feather banner, drone, shopping cart, kid size, luggage, mirror, shiny floor, costume or uniform, and different types of hat and medical equipment. And we, as Bonnie said, we have been using robotic toys to help dogs get used to real baby and the dogs. And we think we can make these items more realistic by putting baby clothes or dog clothes on the toys. And this group touch, we have pool, sandpaper, bubble wrap, baking sheet, and mini grates. And the sound, ideally we want to expose dogs to real sounds, but in that case we cannot expect when the sound is coming or we cannot control the sound. So we use CD or YouTube, start with low volume and gradually make it louder when dog gets comfortable with it. And I don't go over the sounds because I don't have time. Okay. So this is puppy enrichment exposure response check sheet. This is tool to track the amount of times dogs was exposed and the improvement or not of getting comfortable. When introduce item to dog, we will rate the dog's reaction in the sheet. We have 5 categories of dog response. A, no response but interested. B, excited, played behavior. C, startled but self-recovered. D, scared and needed time, support, encouragement of instructor. F, terrified, large behavior, something like Bergin, lunging to the items. On the left row, in green color, there are names of items. In blue column, we will put date when we exposed our puppy to certain items. under date, we have in and out, which tell us if the dog was exposed to the item inside of facility or outside. So this is how it looks like. So September 1st, I exposed my puppy inside of a facility to skateboard. And that's all I have. Thank you.
So thank you, Sinead, and thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie's wandering around somewhere. Next up is Jen Rogers from PAALS. Just give us 30 seconds to get the screen up. Jen.
Okay. A second here. Oh no, that's not what I need to do. It's not up here anymore. Okay. So we did this one?
the one before him, actually. I thought.
Okay. No.
Trying to get rid of that because maybe it's underneath.
Get rid of this one too. Okay. Do you know where it is? Oh my goodness. I don't see it.
Yeah, Jen Rogers.
Where do you see it?
Up one.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rob.
This up here.
That's the thing, if you want to use it, or if you want me to do it for you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm going to try to go fast because I know we have a shorter session, but I'm Jen Rogers. I'm from PAALS in South Carolina here in the U.S., and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our enrichment program and some of the more creative ways or usefulness that we've found that can do more than just entertain dogs or even add to an exposure list. So we're going to talk a little bit about beyond throwing a dog a bone. I think when most of us think about enrichment, most people immediately pull out the nylabone and the Kong. And of course, that's wonderful. Those are great enrichment toys. But enrichment is more than just play. It actually can do a lot for your behavioral program. It certainly can enhance your environment. So for those of you who are more of a fundraiser or administrator, this can do a lot for your donors and your supporters. It also makes your staff and your volunteers have a better attitude about how the dogs are housed and what's going on when they're not in official training sessions. We do find that it can also improve the dog's health, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And also you can help encourage natural behaviors, or you can channel those natural behaviors that we don't like in other ways. Enrichment can also be used to reduce unwanted behaviors. Some of those are natural and some are not. We'll talk a moment about that as well. And of course, enhancing welfare. I think we all would say we're huge dog animal lovers in the audience, or we probably wouldn't be here. But it does really hit at the heart as to what are we doing for the dogs. They do an awful lot for our recipients, so we ought to be thinking the whole way through about what we can do for them to help get them there and also to improve their lives. As full disclosure, I'm what's known as a former fish chucker. That means I was a dolphin and whale trainer. And then I was an exotic animal trainer before I started PAALS, our service dog and animal-assisted intervention program. So for me, in my former world, it was legally mandated that we had to do enrichment for the animals and their welfare. And this looked like a lot of different things that you see up on the screen right now. I was a little surprised when I crossed over into the service dog world, and I realized that that was not really the case for us. And I found that really intriguing. And certainly, our dogs are not quite the captive lion, so there is some difference there, but there's also a lot of similarities. So when I first started touring different programs that existed in an effort to start my own, I kept hearing about kennel effects and how so many people would send dogs out to full-time fosters, and then they would come into a kennel system and they would do what's called washing out. And I'm sure everyone's heard that along the way. I think there's been a lot of strides in traditional kennels in a lot of different ways. There's been a lot of new designs, which I think are fantastic, thinking about the visual parts that the dogs have, looking at it from the dog's perspective. Also things like scents that are diffused to help calm the dogs. We've also seen a lot of social sharing of space instead of dogs being in individual kennels, if you will. And then things like instead of just getting a bowl of food, being able to use interesting, creative puzzle dispensers and things like that, like you see in the picture. Now, again, coming from my other world, I was fortunate enough to go to the American Zoological Association's management school for training and enrichment. And during that time, they taught us about the SPIDER program. And I think it's a really interesting framework to maybe think a little bit further and develop your own enrichment programs. So I'm going to quickly go through this and use an example. SPIDER stands for setting goals, planning, implementation, evaluation, and readjustment. Obviously, this is more than throwing a dog a bone. This was actually developed by Disney's Animal Kingdom doctorates. And so when we talk about setting goals, it really speaks to some of the neuroscience that's been touched on already. And what I mean by that is when I look at certain dogs in certain roles, I want them to have very high functioning brains. I don't necessarily want them to work in their lower brainstem where it's just, fight or flight all the time. It's survival mode. In order to get there, though, while they're growing up and while they're developing, you have to channel those neural pathways for them and with them. And that's where enrichment can play a really big role in those experiences that they're having and how they're having those experiences. So if I have a dog that's going to a child with autism, for example, I'm looking for a dog who is more intuitive, who is going to think on their own and problem solve more than maybe some of the other roles. Planning is, again, part of the arguments I hear against doing enrichment is because of safety concerns. So it does require some planning. You have to have a process where people who have ideas come to you in some way in order to make sure that safety has been considered and all the other things that go into enrichment. Of course, then you need the time and the wherewithal to actually implement it. It's great to have all these wonderful ideas, but you actually have to have a process in which it happens. And then evaluating it. That's probably the one that we're maybe least excited about, because after we do the enrichment, it's not just about cleaning it up, it's about going and seeing what really happened. Did it actually meet any of the goals that you had? And the thing that I think is the most critical and that's often forgotten is readjustment. So if the dog tears up a Kong, does that mean it never gets a Kong again? Or does it mean it never gets any other enrichment? Or is there a different way that you can approach that? So I'm going to give you a quick example of goal setting. In our program, we don't have a traditional kennel system, so our dogs rotate between doggy dorms and what you're seeing here, which is some crate time for their training. We also send them out just for weekends to weekend foster families. So we're a little bit different than some of your formats. And what we do is we look every Monday morning, the family that took the dog for the weekend sends us a report. And we look through that about their outings that they went on, their behaviors in the household, all the different things that they did and what the dog's reactions to those things were. We also sit down as trainers and discuss what the dog did all week long with their instructors. So we talk about any challenges that came up and things like that. So it's important that you're keeping records of these things and having some discussion about them so that you can track the challenges that are going on and start to create goals. And in this picture, you see an automatic mouse or rat. We have a remote control, the dogs are in their crate time, and you see the rat going by. And of course, this is simulating prey drive. So some dogs will bark at that rat, some dogs will be afraid of it and go to the back of their crate, right? So our goal was to teach them not to react loudly or fearfully to the object that they're seeing. One particular challenge we have with some dogs is barking while they're in their crate. So we started to look at that as an example of something we want to set a goal with. But there's other things like digging out in the yards, having a lack of confidence, certainly the training goals that you have, and really allowing the dog to make some choices and how do you guide them to make correct choices. It's really important that you encourage them to use all their senses in appropriate ways in order to get them to their end destination. So I'm going to show you a couple of quick examples. I know you won't be able to see them very well, and again, I can share this information with you afterwards, but this is an example of an enrichment proposal. So it's really very basic. All it does is it asks for the idea, what the costs are, if any, that are involved, any safety concerns that they might need to address, the location of where that enrichment is going to occur, the goal for the enrichment, and then whether or not it's getting approved after someone or a team of people has looked at this. Schedule implementation can be a bit tricky. Sometimes you're going to have volunteers who will implement enrichment, and this can be a huge enrichment program for your volunteers, just doing enrichment. So, when you hear things from your administrators that you don't have time to do these things, just remember that you do. You might have to get a little creative with it. But again, you have to consider things like all the safety concerns of who's implementing it and what's the feasibility, how often can we do these things, and can we really mix it up to keep life interesting for the dogs. And evaluation sheets can be really basic, just a simple spreadsheet that someone can make sure that they're accountable. And I do really emphasize that, because if you're telling people that this is a critical part of your dog's development, then they have to actually sign off that they did it. And sometimes it's very basic. So if we have volunteers doing this, it's not necessarily computer-based, and we just want them to, again, write down some of the basic information. Again, one of the most important things is that readjustment phase, because again, if it didn't meet your goal, or it wasn't safe for the dog or the person implementing it, or maybe it even increased unwanted behaviors, and that's obviously not our goal. Sometimes it's even just a cleanup factor. That was really fun for the dog, but it actually made a giant mess and it took us an hour to clean it up, and we don't have that kind of time. So there are reasons where we might want to think about, let's do this differently or not at all. So what types of behaviors are you trying to encourage? You know, being quiet, I think we would all agree, is pretty critical to most of our dogs' jobs. Digging only in the right spots. Building confidence is pretty critical. Their training, obviously, is critical to what we do and is part of their enrichment. Choice making, and again, using all those different senses. There are 5 types of enrichment categories that we typically look at. Occupational, which is how you use your time. Cognitive, which is, again, using your brain to problem solve. Novelty, which could just be exploring different things, that curiosity factor. And of course, cooperative, which is really essential to what we do when partnering dogs and people together, so using that teamwork effect. And then emotional, you know, how is the dog reacting? How are they showing you with their body language, their feeling about these things? A critical element to implementing any of this is to have your top-down buy-in. So my advice would be keep it really simple. The simpler, the better. Start off with something if you have nothing at all, and then add from there. Get people to be excited about it by letting them have some ownership over it. Label things. I know that sounds really simple, but being able to put enrichment where people can find it and it's labeled correctly is like critical for it to actually get done. Making sure it's accessible and that you are holding people accountable to it. And the benefits are that, again, you have a mentally and physically healthier dog as a result of doing these things. Your volunteer recruitment and retention can improve. Donor relations, they love seeing this on your social media, all the fun things that your dogs get to do, not just the work itself. Staff morale does go up, and increased following on social media. We've seen the more that we post just fun things that our dogs are doing, people tend to feel better about a working dog, because sometimes that does have a really negative connotation. I don't think we have time for questions, but I will just tell you one example of something that we used enrichment-wise to help problem solve a quick behavior problem we had. I was watching a dog bark in a crate as somebody was training in front of the dog, and that dog was getting overstimulated. And by simply taking a fleece tug and tying it inside that crate, the dog was able to diffuse and self-regulate themselves by tugging on that. And now they're practicing an actual task behavior, right, which is fantastic, but they're also not barking. So sometimes enrichment can really be very simplistic that way, and it takes really looking at meeting the dog's needs and also getting the dogs to their end goal. Thank you. First one? That one. Okay. Okay. Oh, no. Oh, no. All right.
That's it. Thank you. Technology never gets any easier, does it? Thank you, Jen. Our final speaker is from Southeastern Guide Dogs, Jessica D'Ambrosio. So, Jessica, welcome.
This one and that one. Okay, got it.
I'll do it if you want to. If you get me a mess.
I think I got it. Thank you. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm not sure if you can all see me because I am pretty short, but as long as you can hear me, then we're all good. So my name's Jessica D'Ambrosio. I've been working with Southeastern Guide Dogs for the past 2 years or so. I started off with them as a certified vet tech, and I've been the manager of their canine conditioning program for about a year and a half now. So today I'm here to talk to you about what conditioning is, some of the benefits that it offers, and then give you some examples of what we do at Southeastern when it comes to their conditioning program. There we go. All right, so I do want to preface this with saying that we don't use this as a training tool, we just use it as preparation for their training, so we do keep those two separate. Now let's talk about what conditioning actually is. The definition of it is the process of training a person or an animal to behave in a certain manner or accept certain circumstances. So at Southeastern, to us, conditioning means offering them enrichment that mimics quote-unquote real-life situations and in a fun environment. So we offer our conditioning program 4 days a week for our dogs, and we work with them for about 45 minutes every day. Now this will last for about 5 to 6 weeks, and then we'll move on to a new set of dogs. So we're really lucky in the fact that when our dogs first come in for training, we have about 3 weeks with them before they begin their work with their trainers. So we get to be greedy in our time and take advantage of that. And so what we do is we work with them for the first 3 weeks, and then when the trainers also begin working with them, the conditioning is done in conjunction with that training. So we use positive reinforcement, and we encourage them to exercise and then perform tasks that we commonly see sensitivities to. Some of those sensitivities include walking on moving or noisy objects or surfaces, different textures under their feet. A big thing with them is also weight management, because we do work with Labradors and Golden Retrievers, and so those guys can tend to put on weight rather quickly than some of the other breeds. And then lastly, we do see some body sensitivity issues, so we try to work with that as well as best we can. Now the conditioning actually includes 3 different portions. So we have a treadmill portion, we have an indoor physio room, and then we have an outdoor agility course. There we go. Okay. All right, so let's talk about what the benefits of conditioning actually are. We'll start off with the physical aspects. So obviously it increases their strength and their muscle mass. And so the way that we measure their muscle mass is using something called a girthometer, which looks just like a tape measure. I don't have a picture up there, but it looks about the same. And what we found is that the average muscle mass actually increases with these dogs about 12.5% over the course of 5 weeks, which is a pretty interesting finding. Also, while we use a variety of different exercises, we're increasing their core and their back muscles and the strength that they provide too. Now, just like you and I, their core provides an important role when it comes to their gait and their posture. So these are obviously important in both guide and assistance work. Now, a strong core is going to help them prevent injury in general, but if they do develop a temporary injury such as a limp, what it does, it helps the body decrease the amount of weight that's redistributed to those other limbs. So it helps for a faster recovery time with them. The next thing that it does, it increases the endurance, stamina, and cardiovascular health of the dogs. So these are important in the length of their training sessions and makes them better equipped for a variety of climates, tasks, and lifestyles of their handlers. For example, we're based in Palmetto, Florida, and so Florida is at sea level. We have no altitude whatsoever, and also we don't really get snow. It's pretty much summer year-round. So for our dogs that are born and raised in Florida, they may not be as acclimated to higher altitudes or more intense weather if they didn't do their conditioning. And so when we're increasing their endurance, stamina, and their cardiovascular health, we're better preparing them to go with handlers that may be living basically anywhere north of Florida. Lastly, it improves their proprioception and coordination. So proprioception is how aware a dog is of its body in relation to space. So it's detected through thousands of different nerves that communicate between the muscles and the limbs, between that and the brain. And so the more that those adjustments are made, the more that you're strengthening those pathways and the more that the proprioception increases. It's also important when it comes to sensory processing. So it can do things like trigger adrenaline and force a reaction or decision, which is really important in any sort of guide work where they need to make a split decision or they need to think for themselves. Also, another example of proprioceptive awareness is the response to pressure, and applies especially to our dogs that work with those who may be physically disabled. So if they're putting a lot of pressure on their dogs if they're unsteady on their feet, it's meant for the dog, the proprioception is meant for them to stand nice and strong and sturdy versus buckling down like they may do if their proprioception isn't as strong. So the more proprioception they have, the more aware they are of both the physical and the environmental stimuli. All right, as for the emotional benefits, so it definitely increases their confidence. When the conditioning first starts out, we kind of evaluate each one of the dogs and see what they're sensitive to or reluctant to do, and also see what they're in favor of. And so each of their conditioning sessions start with what we call a confidence boosting activity. We move on to something that they're a little more reluctant with, whether it's a moving object, something that's making noise when they're standing on it, and then we go back to that confidence boosting activity at the end to keep that confidence nice and high for them. And it's interesting because over the course of the 5 weeks that we have them for their conditioning, you really do see an improvement in most, if not all, of the dogs with their confidence. Also, it helps to reduce their stress and their boredom while they're in kennel. So like I said, we get these dogs out for about an hour a day, 4 days a week, and then this is in addition to their usual enrichment. We have several volunteers who take the dogs out for walks, they read to them, they sing to them, a variety of different enrichment activities, and then in addition to their conditioning. So while we're in the conditioning, we're also offering a lot of verbal praise and physical praise as additional motivation for them. We don't use any sort of training commands, so we're making sure that we are separating conditioning from their training. The only training commands that we would use is if we're transporting them from one building to another, and it's basic things like sitting before they're walking into a building or switching sides. Otherwise, that's all we use. And then lastly, we believe it helps to increase their ability to focus. So conditioning has a lot going on when we have the dogs in a room. We have volunteers talking to the dog, talking to each other, walking in and out of the room, walking around. We have sense of the dog on the equipment as well as the room. So they're smelling each other or the dog that was previously in there. And then on the outside portion where we have our agility section, we have a yard that backs almost up to a highway and it's next to a parking lot. So we have people, cars, dogs, we have everything walking back and forth as they're trying to do their conditioning. So we also have one volunteer that's working with them at a time. So the volunteer has some sort of treat or lickety stick we call it, some sort of lure, and they're concentrating with the dog while the other 2 or 3 volunteers or staff members are taking notes or assisting where they can, but only one person has that treat out at a time, so we're helping the dog to focus and stay attentive to one person. So I'm gonna go over a couple of the exercises that we do. Let's see. Okay. So we're gonna start off with the indoor portion here. There we go. All right, so up there we have our balance pad, our balance disc, and the donuts. So these are kind of like the introductory pieces of equipment that we use. And they're meant to help the dogs kind of maintain their balance or adjust their balance as needed. If you don't have these items, you can also use things like a mattress, an air mattress, cushions, any other material that isn't completely solid. Here we go. All right, and so some of the exercises that we do is just having them walk across the pieces of equipment. They'll stand on it and they'll shift their weight either side to side or forward and backwards. And then this encourages the limbs to make minor adjustments to help strengthen those pathways for their proprioception, as well as strengthen the muscles. So all of these exercises are meant for the same kind of purpose. I do have a slide here that has a couple videos of how to do a couple of my exercises, so I'll see if they'll play for us here. Hold on one second. Let's see. Okay. So the first one is going to be a cookie stretch and a cookie bow is what we call it. And so basically it's like a push-up for dogs. And so as you can see, you're going to want the dog to bend the elbows just much like a push-up, and he's going to stand up nice and straight and tall, and he's stretching out his muscles there and then strengthening the front half as well. The other side is the diagonal stretch. Just like when you and I cross our arms from one side of the body to the other, it helps wake your brain up a little bit. That's kind of what we're doing with that diagonal stretch too. So, and that's one of our very willing volunteers here. He definitely enjoyed his little rewards. And so, yep, as you can see, that has just crossing the body back and forth. Okay. All right, so, whoops. Okay. I'm doing 2 things at once here, let me see. Perfect. So next up, we have the bidirectional board, which you can use something just like a regular board attached to a PVC pipe, and it's just gonna wobble from one side to the other. Again, you can shift their weights. We do something called side crunches, which is similar to just putting their nose to their butt or their glute. And the other thing that you can do when it becomes more complex is having them back up, because believe it or not, a lot of our dogs aren't very aware of their back feet when they're first starting out with us. And so backing up may sound pretty simple, but can actually be pretty complex. The middle piece of equipment there is called a peanut, and that's probably the most versatile piece of equipment that we use for several reasons. You can use one on it or one by itself. You can use several of them. You can stack them on top of each other, and you can have them do just about every exercise that we've covered already. You can also have them stand on one peanut with all of their feet, have them sit on it, lay down. The entire time, all of their muscles are engaged. So it's a pretty versatile piece of equipment that we have. And then the last one is the wobble board, which is the one on the far right. And again, you can do different weight shifting activities. You can have them turn in 360-degree circles, do different pivots. So let's see. And then we have an example of a side crunch and a weight shift here. So the side crunch is where they have their nose touch their glute on either side. And he takes a second, but he gets it. And the dog that's in the videos, we use the same dog for all of the videos. He was in our conditioning program with us for, I believe it was 7 weeks altogether. He started off pretty overweight and got down to a nice healthy weight within the time that we worked with him. And so the weight shifting, as you can see, he's just shifting his weight left to right, and you see the board moving from one side to the other. If he'll stay on there. All right. We do have a treadmill portion as well. I don't have a slide for that one, but basically it's just like you and I. You can use a normal human treadmill. We have one that is meant for dogs, but a normal human treadmill will work as well. And so with that, we just raise an incline and have them walk at certain speeds. We do have them walk upwards of 3.5 to 4 kilometers an hour. And they'll be on that for roughly 15 to 20 minutes at a time. So it does burn a lot of fat and build a lot of muscle simultaneously. All right, and then the last portion is our outdoor portion. So this is the agility section that's actually outside at our facility. Oops. There we go. So a couple of our volunteers actually built this step and ramp tower for us. So one side just consists of steps and the other side is of a ramp. And we also have little grooves on the ramp side to help keep their footing in case it gets slick when, rain or dew, anything like that. And so on this, we like to do slow, deliberate movements to keep those muscles engaged for as long as we can. So just like us, the longer that we have those muscles engaged, the more fat that you're burning, the more energy you're using, and the quicker that you're building up those muscles with them. With this, you can use a variety of the stretches too. It's especially good for their hips. They get nice, strong stretches out of that. And then there's a couple other examples of some things that we have in our agility yard. So as you can see, we have weave poles, we have cavalettis, we have what's called an open tube, and then we have them do an army crawl as well. So all of these increase their proprioception, increase their agility. You can also create obstacle courses for them, keep it nice and interesting, break up the monotony a little bit for both them and for the staff and volunteers that are working with them. And for the most part, they all seem to respond really well. And that's it. Oh, sorry, one more thing. And so they have a couple of daily activities that you can do for them as well in case you aren't able to do a conditioning program or something similar. So if you have them out and about, you can walk them just along an elevated curb, and that's going to encourage a proper gait. You're going to have them walking straight versus crab walking or swinging their hips out. This will help encourage them to walk a straight line. You can also walk them around signs, trees, any other obstacles that you may have. And so that's meant to have their bodies turning from left to right and just breaking up that monotony as well. And then lastly, if you have a couple spare cardboard boxes laying around, you can have them stepping in and out of that too, and that's going to increase their proprioception as well, much like the cavalettis that you just saw. And that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much indeed, Jessica. So we're slightly up against it for time because we lost a bit of time this morning. But I think we've got time for 1 or 2 questions if there's anyone want to ask something. Down the front, are you able to go to the microphone or someone to bring a microphone? Yeah, it's a bit of exercise, that's good. And if you could just say your name and your program, that would be helpful, thank you.
Sure. My name's Caitlin. I'm from National Service Dogs in Ontario. I have a question for you, Jessica. All of that stuff you're doing once they come in for training, or the few weeks before, how are you prepping them at all in puppy program, or is that 5 to 6 weeks? Like is that the first time they're on the peanut or doing the cavalettis?
Am I missing something?
You're on.
Can you guys hear me now? All right, there we go. So when we first started off, it was simply just having the dogs come in, and it was the first time that they were seeing all of those items and all of those pieces of equipment. So we really took our time with that. Recently, we have started implementing a puppy program and a puppy version of the conditioning. It's still in the works. It's still kind of a pilot program, but we are starting those earlier with them too. Probably about 6 or 7 weeks is when they're beginning that portion. And it's the same thing, same type of equipment, same type of exercises, but they're a lot more lax and a lot more, they're allowing them to make the choices and let them kind of do their thing. Whereas the dogs in these pictures, and when we first started off, again, it was the first time that they saw all that stuff. So, thank you.
Thank you. One more question? Anything else? No? Last chance? Okay, brilliant, thank you. Just before you all go, two things. Can you just fill in your feedback, use the Q code or the link? I'm sure you've done it this morning a few times. That'd be incredibly helpful because we really do need to get feedback. And secondly, can you just give a round of applause to the panel? Thank you. And Bonnie at the back. Thank you, Bob. So now it's a break for 15 minutes and then we have the next session. So thank you.